New Orleans Saints wide receiver A.T. Perry will be the team's breakout player in 2024. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look and revisiting the topic of breakout candidates for the New Orleans Saints in 2024. I'm going to tell you why Trevor Penning must be a breakout player for the New Orleans Saints on the offensive side of the football in order for them to find success in 2024. We're also going to take a look at Colin Saunders. Don't forget about him over on the defensive line, going into his second year in the system, why he is about to take a whole next step in this New Orleans Saints defense. And we're going to lead everything off over on the offensive side of the football with why A.T. Perry, New Orleans Saints second year wide receiver, is going to be the breakout player of the year in 2024. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets for a $5 winning bet. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, so I want to start off with A.T. Perry here because I believe that New Orleans Saints second year wide receiver A.T. Perry will be the breakout player of the year for the team in 2024, assuming he stays healthy, which he has not shown an issue in being able to do. Now, there are three things that I think we typically look for when it comes to a breakout player. Number one, we look for talent or skill, right? Number two, we look for momentum. How did they end last season going into the 2024 season, and can they carry that momentum over? And at number three, we look at opportunity, right? We've discussed breakout players a couple of times here on the show. I've even discussed A.T. Perry as a breakout player, but I wanted to revisit this conversation. PFF just did a breakout player for all 32 NFL clubs. They picked Rashid Shaheed, which I have a lot of respect for, but for me, Rashid Shaheed is already broken out. I know he had over, he didn't have like 1,000-yard receiving season or anything like that, but he went over 700 yards. He had 5 receiving touchdowns and made All-Pro and Pro Bowl as a returner. Rashid Shaheed is already broken out. I think that he's probably going to be the guy that's going to land on Cynthia Freeland's most underappreciated list. Underappreciated being about the contract, not about the fan base, right? Obviously, he's appreciated amongst the fan base, but I think he's going to be the guy that's going to be selected on that list by Cynthia Freeland later on this offseason. We'll see if that happens. So for me, A.T. Perry is the breakaway candidate here. Let's discuss why. Just looking at his last 8 games, right? So, okay, well, first of all, we said talent, momentum, opportunity. So let's start with talent, right? Talent is there. We already know it. Wildly productive player at Wake Forest. Yes, he's a 6th round draft pick, but remember, he dropped because of quote unquote character issues. And remember, the news around the character issue thing broke because A.T. Perry himself was the one that told us that. He said that his agent, his representation, told him that the reason why he was falling was because teams had seen some type of character flaw or something like that. I can't remember exactly the phrase that he used, but it was character issue, character flaw, that kind of a thing. Now, I just covered A.T. Perry for a full season. And by the way, A.T. Perry also did that incoming presser with us with his daughter on his lap. It's like, what character issues are we talking about with this guy? There are none. So the New Orleans Saints simply walked away with a steal, and 31 other teams around the NFL just got bad information or read too much into something very small. Interesting how maybe that could happen for a second time for the New Orleans Saints with Spencer Rattler having fallen to them in the 5th round. We'll see how that goes. Remember, the same thing happened with C.J. Gardner-Johnson years ago too. So, okay, that's out of the way. We know A.T. Perry has the talent. Him being a 6th round draft pick does not correlate to, nor was it caused by his production on the field. He was a big time producer in college. And he was a big time producer for the New Orleans Saints last year in just 8 games. So that brings us to momentum. Did he have the momentum at the end of the year? Well, in the season 2023, his rookie year, he had 12 catches, 246 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. Over the course of 17 games, that's probably not a lot, but really that was just over the course of 8 games. You want to talk about momentum? All of those stats he put together on just 18 targets, by the way, over the course of his last 8 games. So yes, the momentum is absolutely there. Pro Football Reference says something pretty cool now to where when you select a certain range of dates within a game log, it'll actually project everything out to you over the course of 17 games. So assuming that everything was the same, but it was for the course of 17 games instead of 8, he would finish with 26 catches, 523 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. That's a breakout season. No, it's not a 1,000-yard receiving season, but it's an 8-touchdown season. You'll take that as a breakout guy. And that's assuming that he had only 38 targets. So this brings us to our last point, opportunity. Because I can't imagine A.T. Perry playing 17 games, very likely as the starting X receiver. That might be the role that he has the opportunity here to earn. We are talking about opportunity after all. And that he'd only see 38 targets. That does not make sense to me. So what we'd have to do is see how many targets have been vacated and what's the opportunity to do this. And we don't have to do this across several different receivers. We can look at one. We look at one wide receiver and then say, okay, if that receiver wasn't there anymore, how many targets could A.T. Perry conceivably get? Chris Olave got 138 targets last year. I don't think that's going to tick up any higher. That's a full workload for a number 1 option. Chris Olave is great right there. Rashid Shaheed, 75 targets, pretty steady for a guy that's getting that's going to be kind of the number 2, if you will. We can take the 18 targets that A.T. Perry had in 2023 and give them to Rashid Shaheed. Just hand them to Rashid Shaheed right now. That'll put him up to about 90. What would that be? 93, 94. Forgive my math. 93 targets for Rashid Shaheed. So you get 138 to Olave, you get 93 to Shaheed. So what's left over for A.T. Perry? Well, how about Michael Thomas's targets? He had a nice 69-yard total last year, or 69 target total last year. What if we just gave 60 to A.T. Perry? Does that seem fair? 60 targets over the course of 17 games? I would say that's even low, but let's just say 60. If we took A.T. Perry's 12 catches, 246 yards, and 4 touchdowns that were all on 18 targets, and we averaged those out on a per target basis, and then multiplied that over the course of 60 targets, here's what A.T. Perry's stat line would look like if he produced at the same per target level on a 17-game, 60-target load that he did back in 2023. 40 catches, 819 yards, 820 if you round up, and 13 receiving touchdowns. Now, I'm going to take the 13 receiving touchdowns out. I think 8 receiving touchdowns is good, right? I don't think that you're going to look at him in a situation where he's going to be specialized in the red zone or specialized in the end zone as much as he was last year. But I do think that 40 catches for 819 yards and 8 touchdowns, 40 catches, 819 yards, and 6 touchdowns, really, really good. To me, that's a breakout season. It might not be an all-pro season. It might not be a Pro Bowl season. It might not be, a top wide receiver season, but it's a breakout season for a guy that came in and had just 246 yards, but 4 touchdowns last year. So A.T. Perry just simply checks all the boxes: momentum, opportunity, and of course, talent. My runners up here, by the way, running back Kendre Miller, 75-yard rushing game against the Atlanta Falcons to close out the season. There's some momentum. He's got the talent. What will his opportunity be? And then Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson has the momentum again this year, just like he did going into last year. But 2023 was a little bit disappointing in terms of what the expectations were for him, like his own expectations, his own expectations of what that season should have been in 2023. He didn't necessarily achieve that. And a lot of that had to do with injuries, things like that. Now Juwan Johnson picked up a little more momentum towards the end of the season. Let's see what he can do crossing into 2024. But for me, it's all A.T. Perry all the time. Coming up next, it's also all Colin Saunders all the time, because I think a second year in this Dennis Allen system, we're about to see a whole new version of Colin Saunders unlocked in 2024. Let me tell you why. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, our official sports betting partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's winner go home time, win winner take all time over with the NBA and in the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you the opportunity to bring home a big win yourself. Right now, new customers are going to be able to get $150 in bonus bets simply by winning your first $5 bet. That's it. That's $150 that you can then use on spreads, money lines, player props, and much more. All you got to do is put $5 down, win that bet. You can bet it on a heavy favorite. Doesn't matter where you put it. You go $5 down, you win that bet. You get that little bit of winnings, and you get $150 in bonus bets. Then you could turn around and bet on the New Orleans Saints or against the New Orleans Saints, who are favored 4.5 to open up the season in 2024 against the Carolina Panthers. That one feels like one that they should win, so maybe you go the win route there. But either way, you're going to be able to find all the fun that you're looking for over at FanDuel.com/lockedon, and they're going to be able to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family. New Orleans Saints defensive tackle Colin Saunders is going into his second year in the New Orleans Saints system and could potentially make it the best year of his career. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. You're going to be able to find that over on YouTube. The first ever national sports 24/7 stream available on YouTube, giving you all the biggest stories from around the world of sports, but it's the local experts that are bringing it to you, so you know you're getting the right information. Go and check it out each and every day. Locked On Sports Today. You can find the 24/7 stream on YouTube. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire Channels TV Channels app as well. So go check it out there. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So talking about breakout candidates here. A.T. Perry, I went into like a little bit of a deeper dive into. I'm going to have some of those per target numbers and things like that written up for you over at Saints News Network later on this week as well. If you want to find a place where you can kind of see all of those numbers kind of listed out. I'm not going to dive into too many numbers here when it comes to Colin Saunders. I got like one or two. But my biggest thing about Colin Saunders comes down to talent and opportunity, right? We talked about talent, momentum, opportunity. The two biggest ones for me are the first and the third. So talent-wise, we know Colin Saunders is really, really good. And I know that like the biggest conversation that was had about him last year was when he was actually playing over on the offensive side of the football. And that is just because like it was such a novelty thing. It was a cool moment, him getting that opportunity to go out there and lead block. I hope he did the water boy thing when he was running out there to block people. I'll ask him about that during training camp now that I thought about it. But beyond all of that stuff, like Colin Saunders played extremely well on the defensive side of the football. Also, he served a lot more as kind of a run stopper, but in his time as a pass rusher as well from the defensive interior, he was noticeable in terms of his ability to be able to interrupt there. He was one of the defensive tackles outside of Malcolm Roach who was injured after a certain portion of the season, who actually received the least amount of pass rushing snaps in 2023. I don't think that carries over to 2024, or at least I'd be surprised if it did. 246 pass rushing snaps, or 246 passing snaps, 245 pass rushing snaps for Colin Saunders. You compare that to Brian Brzee, 391. Nathan Shepard, 290. Tano Passanio, who played a lot on the interior, 264. So you see his number, it's a little bit lower than each one of those guys. So I think that the talent is absolutely there, right? Like he's a really, really good player. We know this about him. And I think he takes another step here in 2024. I actually spoke to him last year during the season. And one of the things that we talked about was, what is the first year in a system like? And what he basically described was that your first year in a system, you're just trying to do everything by the rules, by the book, learn the system. Then when you get through that, you have a little bit more time to kind of, add your own flair to it, to where you know that your assignment is the let's just say his assignment is the A gap, the gap in between the center and the guard, right? Let's say that his assignment as a 3-tech lining up over the guard is to attack the A gap. Last year, he would just off the snap attack the A gap. He would go and hit his run fit. He would go and hit his responsibility. This year, though, he might do a little bit more. I'm going to fake to the B gap between the guard and the tackle, and then swim back inside and come in over the top of the inside shoulder of the guard to penetrate at the A gap and get right up the middle, and then be able to put himself in position to make more plays, either as a pass rusher or at sacks as a pass rusher, hits, pressures as a pass rusher, and then of course tackles for a loss or redirecting a running back in the run game. I think that's where his game takes the next step. I'll call it ornamentation. You could just cross over when you dribble from right to left, or you can hezi to the right and then cross over to the left, right? And the ornamentation comes with just learning the game, learning your responsibilities, learning what works, learning how comfortable you are in those situations. And I think that Colin Saunders will be taking a big step towards comfort in 2024 now that he has been in the system for a year. Now let's talk about opportunity, because opportunity is the other big one, right? Momentum's a little bit tougher to build as a defensive interior guy. I guess maybe we could say that Brian Brzee was a defensive interior player last year that built the most momentum. But I would even say that Colin Saunders' game got better and more comfortable over the course of the year as well. But going into the opportunity conversation, the opportunity is simply there for him, right? Like the Saints have not added much talent when it comes to defensive tackle. They brought back Jack Heflin, who spent his time last year on the Saints practice squad. They brought him back on a reserve future deal. He'd get an opportunity in camp to earn a spot, and that spot might be back on the practice squad. They drafted Christian Boyd in the 6th round of this year's draft out of University of Northern Iowa, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to be ready to take, several hundreds of defensive snaps in 2024 unless he surprises everybody or unless there's injuries ahead of him. But he should have time to just develop, right? And play like a very solid role as a run stuffer, all those other things. So Colin Saunders isn't going to get less opportunity in 2024 than he got in 2023, which gives him the opportunity then to earn more snaps, earn more chances when he can go out there and be next to Brian Brzee, go out there and be next to Nathan Shepard, Christian Boyd, Tana Passanio playing on the interior as well as the outside, all those things that he does. So I'm really excited to see Colin Saunders' second year in New Orleans, right? Second year in the New Orleans Saints system. Because I think that he has the talent, and I think that talent will increase his opportunity, and then it'll build some of that momentum. So I look forward to seeing Colin Saunders in his second year in the defense. A couple of other guys that I've got my eyes on. Whoever the safety is lining up next to Tyrann Mathieu, whether it's Jonathan Abram or Jordan Howden, those two in particular, I would peg as potential breakout players. Jonathan Abram played so incredibly well next to Tyrann Mathieu at the end of last season, those final 2 games, that it's hard not to see him as the starter next to Tyrann Mathieu week 1 up against the Carolina Panthers. That's my general take around that. And breakout wise, like if they play that well together and he plays that well, let's call it 13 games out of 17, 10 games out of 17, that could be one of Jonathan Abram's better seasons, much like here in 2024, where Colin Saunders can earn more snaps as opposed to being rotated as much as he was rotated last year, as much as he was rotated in Kansas City, gives him the opportunity to potentially have his best season of his career as well. Jordan Howden going into his second year, pretty clear and obvious how that could happen, right? Just by being out on the field. But again, Jordan Howden's role as a free safety away from the football, not necessarily playing down in the box, just feels a little bit more like it fits for him. And then finally, one guy that I'm just going to throw like a little vote of confidence towards is Alontae Taylor. Alontae Taylor right now could end up being the next Zach Bond of this New Orleans Saints defense. What I mean by that is the team playing him at a place where he's not his strongest and not playing him at a place where he is his strongest. We saw that with Zach Bond, right? Should have been rushing the passer much, much more. Even if not playing a full-time pass rusher role, could have been a supplemental guy, could have been a role player from that type of responsibility. And the Saints just didn't do that, right? They forced him to play off ball. They wanted him to be a coverage guy. The Saints are doing kind of the same thing with Alontae Taylor, making him play in the slot. And they did that last year. It looks like he'd be in line to do that again this year. Now, some of that is that it's who are you going to start him over, right? If Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo are both on the outside there, who are you going to start him over, right? Like there's nothing there. So what you really need is Alontae Taylor to just kind of like, you're crossing your fingers, Alontae Taylor will just hold on throughout all this until it becomes potentially him and Kool-Aid, right? Or potentially him and Paulson, you know what I mean? Across from one another. So we'll see which way it all goes, but I'm going to give a little vote of confidence towards Alontae Taylor because I feel like he's not getting a lot of those votes of confidence. So I'm going to give him that vote of confidence and say he could potentially be a breakout guy too, but it might come down less about his talent, which we know that he has, less about his momentum, which he finished the season with a pair of interceptions, right? But more about his opportunity and what opportunity will be given to him by the Saints. So it might work, it might not work. And in either case, especially if it doesn't work, it might have nothing to do with Alontae Taylor himself. All right, coming up next, I'm going to tell you about Trevor Penning needs to be a breakout player for the New Orleans Saints in 2024, as well as a couple of other players that fall on that list as well. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the greatest place to go and pick up your tickets, especially if you're like me and you don't really want to plan too early. You kind of want to wait and see what the vibes are like a certain evening. Like, oh, this person's playing here, or this game's going on, or this person's doing some stand-up. You can find all of that over at Game Time, all the way down with deals all the way down to the beginning of the event, sometimes even an hour after the event starts, they're still doing deals. There's flash deals, there's zone deals, there's all-in pricing, and of course, Game Time ticket coverage as well, to where your coverage is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And especially right now with some really great games on the way for the New Orleans Saints, you're going to be able to be here at home with Sean Payton coming back to town, the Las Vegas Raiders coming to town to take on former quarterback Derek Carr. So many good matchups to check out. You're going to want to get those tickets over on Game Time, either months or moments in advance. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets today with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints need Trevor Penning to have that breakout year in 2024, and two other players could absolutely benefit from that as well. I appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. So we'll be right back at you with another new episode tomorrow, taking a look at some of the most undervalued players for the New Orleans Saints, the guys that really help to make things happen for the team, and that could maybe help to move the needle in 2024, even though they're not on top paid level contracts. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. Today, though, we're looking at breakout guys, and we're revisiting this. We might revisit it again after training camp, after we've gotten to see some of these guys actually perform and stuff like that too, because some players might jump off the field in a way that we're not thinking about right now, and guys that we're thinking about right now who could be breakout players might not have the strongest camps. It might change how we feel going into that. So we'll be covering all of that as well. And don't forget, we'll be in Irvine for all of Saints camp. So everything that you're going to be getting here will be firsthand accounts of what's going on at New Orleans Saints training camp. And so I'm super, super grateful to be able to do that. If anybody's interested in sponsoring the show while I'm spending all of my money to go to Irvine for 4 weeks to cover the team, please feel free to reach out and let me know, because I will accept the help. All right. So as we're taking a look here for the potential breakout players for the New Orleans Saints that need to break out, the guys that can actually help to define this season, I want to start off with Trevor Penning. So Trevor Penning, I've had a lot of people saying to me, I'm crazy just for even thinking that Trevor Penning is going to start at left tackle, which is wild. We've seen 6 games of this guy, and there's no way that that's enough. We've seen so many games of Sam Darnold, and he's still getting contracts. We've seen so many games of some of the worst quarterback play from some of these, players that continue to get jobs and continue to even get starting roles at the most important position in football. Yet we've seen 6 games of Trevor Penning, and somehow that's enough to say he's cooked. He's a bust. He's X, Y, and Z. I'm not ready to make that leap of faith. And I think that there are a lot of people, too, that have read in a little bit too much on the Taliesin Fuanga playing at left tackle thing. That was really about the fact that, they know he can play right tackle. Let's see what he can do at left tackle so that they can better understand a little bit of his versatility, what he brings. Do you like your backup right tackle at the right tackle spot better than you like your backup left tackle at the left tackle spot if you need to go to a backup? Meaning, if Trevor Penning goes down, maybe you don't want to go to the backup left tackle, and instead you actually want to go to Taliesin Fuanga, move him over to left tackle because you actually feel better about the backup right tackle that can step in. It could mean any number of things in terms of safeguarding, insurance, contingency plans, so on and so forth. And it could also mean that he starts at left tackle, right? We can't rule that out. It's not it's absolutely a non-zero chance that happens. But what seems more likely is that the Saints will want their first round investment from a couple years ago to, work, start, play. Makes sense, right? So for that, I believe, or because of that, I believe that the Saints need Trevor Penning to be a bit of a breakout player here in 2023. Or 2024. Now, how do you measure a breakout offensive lineman? That can become tricky, right? Because really what you're looking for is not what kind of stats he racks up, because there are not going to be stats. It's how many stats does he allow the guys opposite him to get? How many tackles for a loss does he surrender in the run game? Can they run the ball in his direction? Can he line up one-on-one with a premier offense or defensive lineman, edge rusher, and hold them to no sacks? How many stats do those players get? That's really what you're looking at. So the Saints, who are going to play the Arizona Cardinals as well as the San Francisco 49ers in the preseason on the road before coming home for their final preseason game. The game against the San Francisco 49ers will also include joint practices in Irvine. So he'll get an early opportunity, just like he did last year, going up against one of the Bosa brothers and Khalil Mack and all that over with the Los Angeles Chargers. He's now going to get the opportunity to go up against the other Bosa brother in San Francisco, as well as some elite defensive pressure players over in San Francisco as well. So will we see the warning signs like we saw last year, or will we see improved play this year? I think that we'll get an early indication, thanks to training camp and thanks to those joint practices, of where Trevor Penning really is going. But the New Orleans Saints need him to be a breakout player, because that allows them to get what they can believe is their best starting five out there based upon what they have invested in Penning, in Taliesin Fuanga, in Cesar Ruiz, in Eric McCoy, and then whoever the heck is going to play left guard. We'll see. That could be the new signing in Lucas Patrick. It could be Nick Saldiveri, who they traded up to the 4th round to grab last year. Who knows? Who knows where that's going? It could be Ali Udo as well. There's any number of possibilities that could happen there. But for me, the health, the production, the success of this offensive line is going to be based on who's protecting Derek Carr's blind side. And that's very likely to be Trevor Penning in 2024. And the Saints need him to be a breakout player. Him being a breakout player in 2024 in the run game also is particularly helpful, because him being the athletic player that he is, him being the road grader that he is in the run game in a run-heavy system like a wide zone system, that will likely end up helping you move your system ahead and will likely help your system be immediately effective, even though new, because you're getting that high-level play from your offensive line. And I think he has to play a large part in that. Another player that I think the Saints need to have a breakout season in 2024 is Pete Werner. And it's not to say that Pete Werner is underperformed. I think that Pete Werner has played solidly over the course of his 3 years, but now as he goes into a contract year here in 2024, I think it's in his best interest and it's in the Saints' best interest that he has a big season. And really, like, I spoke to somebody within the organization who basically said like what they really need from Pete Werner is consistency, right? And we've heard this before. We've heard this about Peyton Turner. We heard this about Isaiah Foskey before his injury last year. There's a lot of these players that are like, hey, they're really good and they can go out there and they can make plays and they can do all these other things, but consistency over flash is really what's needed. Now, I think that two things are going to happen here for Pete Werner. One of which is that it's another season, but this time with the added boost of motivation in the contract year. And he gets the added boost of motivation with Willie Gay being in the building, who is a playmaker at the position. And that was kind of the missing piece for Pete Werner, right? He was one of those kind of jack of all trades, master of none type guys that could do a little bit of everything over on your defensive side. You love those guys, but they need to perform consistently on a game-to-game basis. And so you would see him be a good pursuit player. You would see him be a fine coverage player. You would see him be a good run player. You would see all the run defender, all those things. You didn't really ever get the opportunity, though, to see him be a playmaker. We've seen it a couple of times, right? Him stripping Olamide Zaccheaus, stripping him a couple of years ago. We saw an interception from him last year. All these other things, or a turnover forced by him last year. There's all these pieces to Pete Werner's playmaking ability that now have to become more consistent. Doesn't mean that he needs an interception every single game, or to force a fumble every single game, or to recover a fumble every single game. He just needs to be able to do it a little bit more often, and while also consistently showing up in the run game, showing up as a pursuit player, showing up as a pressure player when called upon as well. I think that if he can kind of start to check all those boxes a little bit more consistently so that we're seeing some version of that each week, then I think you're great. I think you're great with Pete Werner at that point, but you just need to see the consistency there. And again, I don't think he's a bad player by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that the expectations of him are higher right now. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. And then finally, and this one's a little tricky because I think people would make the argument that, hey, this player's already had his breakout year, but does it matter if he's had his breakout year for another team? Well, look at that Chase Young. Yes, Chase Young finished last year with 7.5 sacks. Just like his rookie season, he had 7.5 sacks. He also finished with a few tackles for a loss, 7 tackles for a loss, all those other things. But I think a big year from Chase Young where he gets 8 sacks moves the needle ridiculously for the New Orleans Saints defense. Cam Jordan was just on Inside the NFL or one of those shows, and he talked about adding Chase Young to that defense and the boost that they get from it. John Hendricks wrote about it over at Saints News Network. But I think that the thing that I want to highlight here is that, like, if Chase Young produces and gets you, let's just say, more than a handful of sacks, right, does better than what Marcus Davenport has given you during his time consistently, then I think your defense is at a whole other level. Right. And if your defense is getting more consistent pressure, not just the sack numbers, but more consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks, then I think that aids them quite a bit and helps coverage, helps in the run game, helps the second level, all this stuff that kind of permeates throughout the rest of the defense and makes the entire defense better. So I'll throw Chase Young in there as well as a breakout player from a position where the Saints most need a breakout performance, if that makes sense, as an edge rusher. All right. So that's 9 different players that we're looking at as potential breakout players. A.T. Perry, Colin Saunders, Trevor Penning, all highlighting the list, though. If you have more breakout players, let me know. Let me know what you think. And tomorrow, we're taking a look at some of the more undervalued players based upon their contracts. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. Appreciate you very much, as always. Making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans and Caroline Fitton over at Locked On LSU to keep engaged with what's going on around the rest of Locked On Louisiana. We appreciate you very much making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.